Hello and welcome back to the Lowdown, everybody. On today's show, we are talking about the 3 signings that will transform Arsenal into title winners. Coming up, we discuss who Arsenal should sign between Viktor Osimhen and Viktor Gyokeres.
He would bring what Havertz brings in terms of work rate, but in terms of his movement in the box and his ability to finish from a number of different angles, it's pretty hard to replicate with most other strikers around Europe.
The ideal winger to replace Martinelli.
You look at all the major attacks from the best teams in Europe, and all of them have 2 top quality options in every position.
And the star who could challenge Declan Rice in midfield.
It would be a really, really special signing.
Hello and welcome back to the Lowdown, everybody. I am back after a week-long hiatus, as is Mike McCubbin, fresh from hosting last week as well. And we've got Sam Blitz, football journalist from Sky Sports, also seen on the football show on Sky Sports News, the Essential Football Podcast, numerous other places. How are we doing, Sam?
Yeah, very well. Thank you very much for having me back.
Great to have you on board. Sam covers Arsenal extensively, and that is our topic of the day. Specifically, the signings Arsenal could bring in this summer to win the title next year. I think we are probably at the stage where everyone's put up the white flag in terms of this year. We're filming this before their game against PSV as well. But Sam, maybe just set the scene slightly. Your work, at Arsenal this season. This game against PSV feels pretty massive, and it's fair to say that this season really hasn't gone to plan for Arsenal.
Yeah, I think it's a mixed season for Arsenal. That, if you look at the context of the season compared to last season, if they beat PSV Eindhoven in this Champions League last 16, they'll reach the quarterfinals, and then if they hang on to second place, because I think it's fair to say they're more likely to finish third than first, then actually second place and the quarterfinals of the Champions League is exactly what they achieved last season. So they're not really going backwards in a sense, but I think there is perhaps a small frustration at the club that if Manchester City, that the Manchester City did drop off, that they would be the one to sort of take that top spot, and the fact that Liverpool have sort of stolen a march in an incredible season. I think that is the caveat is an interesting point, and it's a shame for them, I think. So yeah, I think that they didn't quite see Liverpool coming, and if you look at their results, particularly in the last few weeks, even if they'd picked up points in half of the games where they dropped points, I still think they'd be behind Liverpool in the table. So there's that element to it, and of course there's the injuries. I don't think anyone could see that coming, and when you look at the sheer amount of injuries in one position, say Liverpool lost Salah, Diaz, Gakpo, Jota, which Arsenal have in Saka, Martinelli, Havertz and Jesus, then I don't think Liverpool would be as far ahead in the Premier League table as they are. And actually, I think we saw that last season, didn't we? When Liverpool, there was that period around the Carabao Cup final where they had to play the kids. They lost Salah to injury, they lost Núñez to injury. Van Dijk was not quite the player he was. So, yeah, it does happen. And Liverpool showed that last season, Arsenal showing it this season. So I think what it will mean, though, is a big summer.
Yeah. I mean, injuries have played such a decisive role for sure, Mikey, but Arsenal's situation going into this summer in terms of a change of sporting director as well, it's not as clear cut as it has been in previous years with Edu and Arteta, that previous relationship there.
Yeah, definitely not. And I mean, you speak about injuries, and yes, the big one, Salah, hasn't happened yet for Liverpool, but there have been injuries in that forward line, and there have been players who've dropped off in terms of form in that forward line. I do feel like with Arsenal that, or do you? I guess this is a question as well. Do you not think that these injury problems could have been sorted a little bit more had the spending been better last summer? I mean, like Saka, has had an amazing injury record up until now, but it did feel like it was only a matter of time until Arsenal had to deal without him for a month or two. And especially, I guess we'll get onto the potential new sporting director, but the way that Edu eventually left, and last summer where it wasn't quite certain whose signings they were really, especially in the case of waiting till the last minute to get in Raheem Sterling, the lack of the lack of a real plan, it felt like, in terms of signing a winger or signing a forward in general. Do you feel like that was also a defining factor in Arsenal not mounting that serious title challenge this year? Yeah,
I think the club will always say that hindsight is a brilliant thing, and to lose Gabriel Jesus and Havertz to 2 long-term injuries in the space of 4 to 6 weeks is a very freak incident to happen. So there was a lot of talk about whether Arsenal needed the striker, and I think perhaps maybe the mistake Arsenal made was not looking early enough when Saka got injured to then try and find that option, because as we've seen, Saka is, before he got injured, he dominated the big chance creation metrics in Europe's top 5 leagues. No one was really sort of at his level. And actually, when you look at those sort of metrics now, the likes of Rafinha and Salah have only just caught up with him and actually only just overtaken him in those tallies. So perhaps that was the moment where Arsenal needed to strike. They did look after Jesus got injured, but it did feel like there just weren't too many options out there.
But even with Jesus, I mean, it always couldn't be a given that they could rely on Jesus this season anyway, because of his recent injury record going into the campaign. I do just feel like a stronger winger brought in earlier in the summer, I think, could have just solved a lot of problems. Obviously, it's easier said than done. Wingers are expensive. But in hindsight now, that last minute play for Raheem Sterling, who hasn't looked like a good fit under Arteta, evidently because he barely plays him, even with this injury crisis that they've got in the forward line. It does feel like Arsenal missed a trick there by not maybe stumping up more money in the summer for a bigger target. But I guess we'll get on to that. And I guess the big news this week is that Andrea Berta they're in advanced talks to hire him. Atletico Madrid sporting director, or until the end of last year he was, and had been there since 2013. And I guess that's an interesting one, because with Edu leaving, Arteta was Edu's man. I felt like at least maybe this, a little bit slightly worrying for Arteta not to have that team in place, or at least have his kind of partner in crime there at the club. But with Berta potentially coming in, someone who is used to working with someone like Simeone, who had such a hold over Atletico Madrid, and in the same way that I think Arteta is starting to have at Arsenal. Yeah, do you think this is a positive half for Arsenal going into the summer?
I think it's going to be a big summer, no matter what, because when you look at the money that Arsenal have brought in, especially over the last 12 to 18 months, they've generated a lot of pure profit sales from the likes of Emile Smith-Rowe, Eddie Nketiah, and those were actually quite big and good sales to make. You look at Nketiah, who's only just scored his first Premier League goal for Palace. Emile Smith-Rowe has shown those sort of injury sort of lapses again. So it is a big summer. I think it's Arsenal's biggest summer for some time. Now, Andrea Berta is the interesting one, because you can draw a lot of comparisons between Berta's Atletico Madrid and the situation Arsenal are in now, when you've got, Arsenal are a side that, haven't won the top flight for some time. And there are two other sides who have won it more often in Man City and Liverpool. That's very similar to what Atleti have with Real Madrid and Barcelona. So it's a similar sort of stature of club. The one thing that perhaps, as an analyst, sort of might concern me is the investments that Berta made at Atleti, and quite a lot of big expensive deals. Joao Felix from Benfica. Did Atletico really get their money's worth in that deal?
Not close, no.
Not close. Thomas Lemar, another big money move. They signed Diego Costa for about 14 million, having already let him go to Chelsea. So, it's Arsenal aren't really in a position to make expensive mistakes. They haven't got the backing that necessarily Man City have or Man United have sort of historically. So it will be an interesting one, it's especially in terms of, it seemed a bit, this sporting director hiring process seemed a little bit random. You were talking about Ocampos at PSG, you were talking about Jason Ato, who was the deputy, talking about loads of various different names, Dan Ashworth. It all seemed a bit sporadic. I think this is the week, and Josh Kroenke was at the Arsenal training ground this week to speak with Jason Ato and Richard Garlick. This feels like it's starting to ramp up now.
For sure. I think if you've been in charge of any club for that long in terms of being a sporting director, there'll be some misses, there'll be some real hits as well. And I think it's fair to say that he's got a lot right during his time at Atletico Madrid as well. And given the financial sort of ramifications of being Atletico Madrid versus Real Madrid and Barcelona, who have such an advantage in terms of TV rights as well. I think 2 titles in that time, 2 Champions League finals. I know their recent form in the Champions League up until this season has been pretty poor for a club of their stature, but I still think he can take a lot of credit for some of the success stories that they've had over the years. You know, short-term deals, very clever as well, like Suarez, bringing back Griezmann, etc., has really worked. Players like Marcus Llorente as well have really developed. Rodrigo de Paul's like really finally hit his straps this season as well. But it's interesting that City will be under Viana, new sporting director. Arsenal have a new sporting director. Liverpool have huge names that could depart. I think it looks unlikely, but they could depart. And Michael Edwards is now back established at Liverpool. Richard Hughes has been there for a full season now as well. So, you know, there's a certain sort of uncertainty at all major top clubs this summer. But we've heard about Arsenal's potential sporting director, but Sam Blitz is going to be our sporting director today. What we've done, guys, is we are going to suggest 3 signings each, 1 striker, 1 winger and 1 midfielder, which we think are the areas Arsenal are going to target most of all. I mean, Sam, you were briefly mentioning maybe a backup goalkeeper could come in.
Yeah, I think that those are the 4 major holes in the squad. When you look at the team, you know, backup goalkeeper is perhaps the one. I'd be surprised if they kept Neto on. And actually, when you look at the back line, it's actually been full for 2 seasons now. The problem is that last season Arsenal lost Yuri and Timber to a season-long injury. This season they've lost Ben White for 4 months and Tomiyasu's been out for the season. So actually they've not had their entire defensive roster there at all times. So yeah, I think the defence and goalkeeper, obviously backup goalkeeper, are fine in terms of, but the major signings, I think, definitely 1, maybe 2 forwards and a midfielder as well.
Okay, that is what we have chosen as the areas to focus on. Mikey, why don't you kick off? We're starting at the front with the big name, the striker.
Okay.
Who do you think Arsenal should bring in? Also, guys, we've gone budgetless as well.
Oh. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think, I think Berta and Blitz, the dynamic duo, deserve a big budget in the first summer. Like you say, lots of pure profit, from selling the likes of Smith Rowe last year. And also, I think, look, this is, the title of this video is 3 signings to win Arsenal the title. I think if you're signing a striker to win you the title, you have to spend big. You have to spend big. We can't be going for like Liam Delap at 40-50 million here. In fact, actually the striker that I'm going to suggest doesn't even cost that much more, really, given that he's got a potential 75 million euro release clause, or he has a release clause around that price, at least according to Fabrizio Romano, who's pretty reliable on these things. And that's Viktor Osimhen at Galatasaray, of course, on loan from Napoli. Is having another brilliant scoring season, 16 goals in 18 starts in the Turkish Super League. Of course, the Turkish Super League, some way off the level of the Premier League, but this is someone who at 26 years of age has thrived in a number of top European leagues, really made a name for himself at Lille after those terrible, that terrible injury record at Wolfsburg as a teenager. Then, seamlessly made the move to Napoli, of course, delivered their first title since, 1990, in that brilliant 22-23 season. And he's hit double figures in basically every senior year of football that he's had without injury problems, which is since 2018-19. Every full season he's hit double figures in the league, which is, I think, a pretty good sign of what you could expect from him at Arsenal. The step up to the Premier League is always going to be, there's always going to be a slight unknown about how a striker is going to do coming into the Premier League. But I think in an Arsenal side, which when Saka and Odegaard are fit, are really full of chance creation, especially given another player who I'm going to suggest later on. I think Osimhen would have amazing service at Arsenal, and I think he would bring something. He would bring what Havertz brings in terms of work rate, but in terms of his movement in the box and his ability to finish from a number of different angles, just that variety that he has to his game. I think it's pretty hard to replicate with most other strikers around Europe. So yeah, Viktor Osimhen would be my shout.
It's a big one. It's a good one as well. It's a good one. I'm going to give you another big option as well. I was along the similar lines as Mikey. I've actually gone maybe a little bit more bargain hunting in another one of my positions. But for striker, I think you need a big name, and I'm going with Viktor Gyokeres. of
Victor versus
Sporting
Victor.
CP. It's the Viktor face-off. Now, it has just been an amazing turnaround for him. 4 seasons ago, he was on loan with Swansea in the Championship. Obviously gets I think it was a £1 million move to Coventry or so. That move couldn't have really gone better. He takes them to the playoff final, then joins Sporting. And it was their club record signing at the time, €20 million. And it just couldn't have gone better. In his first season, 43 goals and 15 assists in 50 games. As Sporting won their first league title since 2002. They finished 10 points clear that year. They reached the Europa League quarter-finals. This year as well, he's backed it up with 35 goals in another 38 games. And Ruben Amorim left in November, and there's been, they're onto their second manager since his departure, and there has been a slight drop-off, but he's still got Sporting to be top of the Primera Liga. They're level on points with Benfica. He helped them qualify for the Champions League knockouts. He scored a hat-trick against Man City, and that was Man City at the start of their real dip as well. It wasn't, the later November, December Man City. This was really the guy that kind of set the tone, and the result that set the tone for what was to come for Man City as well. He got a hat-trick, as I said. He got all 5 of his shots on target. And then comes that tie against Dortmund, where Rui Borges, their new manager, decides to play him for 30 minutes, and he's rested or injured. It's all a bit ambivalent about what's gone on there in the second leg. They lose 3-0. They draw the second leg 0-0. And it does seem like they are preparing for his departure now. Now, Rui Borges has come out and said he's having some issues physically. Bizarrely, maybe I'm being a bit sceptical, but Quenda as well, who's been linked to a move with Man United, has also dropped out of the first team recently because he's got physical issues. Now, are they trying to take them away from the shop window? Are they trying to prepare for life without them? I'm not sure. I couldn't speculate on that without knowing the full information. But the reports that have been widely circulated are that Sporting would be willing to accept a deal between £62 million and £70 million, which for a player with his record, I don't think it's that crazy at all. He would be, I think, their third record signing behind Rice and Nicola Pepe, only just more than Havertz. I think it's around a similar fee that they brought in for Aubameyang. And Arsenal, I feel like, can do this deal. And in terms of what attracts me to Gyokeres over Osimhen, I think Osimhen's injury issues are slightly overhyped, if I'm totally honest. Like, a lot of them are quite freak injuries. Like, he dislocated his eye socket, he dislocated his shoulder, he had a bout of malaria as well. But when he is on the pitch, he is a very regular goal scorer. But Gyokeres has a better fitness record, for sure. I don't think there's any doubt about it. I'd also say that he's maybe, and we've got to take into account that he's playing in the Primera Liga rather than Osimhen's peak at Napoli, but I think he's slightly more creative as well. This season he's averaging 0.3 expected assists per 90. That's only 0.02 less than Cole Palmer in the Premier League. So this is a guy that can create as well as score. He is a real physical handful for any defences whatsoever. He can run the channels really effectively. And you just watch him play, and there is this almost magnetic quality to him. You cannot take your eyes away from him. He is just a rampaging bull, but that almost makes him sound less technically assured than he is as well. I think he is really the full package. He currently ranks in the top 1% of forwards in Europe for short passes completed. His hold-up play is very succinct and very clean. And I think it's an achievable aim. There has been links or speculation that he wants to link up with Ruben Amorim, obviously the guy that brought him to Sporting, the guy that's had so much success with him. They were still unbeaten, of course, in the league when Ruben Amorim joined Man United. I wonder whether he's regretting going mid-season, probably. But Viktor Gyokeres, if you're getting the choice between Arsenal right now and Man United, despite the Amorim factor, you've got to go to Arsenal every day of the week for sure. So I think this is an achievable aim. And Sam, we got to battle the victors first up.
Yeah, I actually spoke to Viktor Gyokeres' former assistant coach at Coventry, and we were previewing a piece for him ahead of him scoring the hat-trick against Man City. And he revealed sort of 3 big things about Gyokeres. The first thing is he's an obsessive goal scorer. The way he acts in training, the way he acts around the place. He is obsessed with getting goals. He'll do backboard and finishing trainings and all of these sort of drills that the obsessive strikers do. The second thing is that he does get confidence from people investing in him. So they sort of said they had him on loan at Coventry beforehand, and during that loan spell they weren't really sure on him because he was out of confidence. But then when they signed him permanently for that £1 million fee, he then just completely switched. So if that's a £1 million fee, and we've already seen what happens when Sporting Lisbon put £20 million on the table, what's he going to be like if somebody puts
150 goals a season?
Potentially. Yeah. But the last thing he said is that Gyokeres has an ego, which isn't there at the start. He sort of gets a feel for the place, works hard, is very humble to begin with. But then the more goals he scores, the more agitated he gets, the more he wants to take over training, the more sort of he realises that perhaps he might have outgrown where he is. And, that happened at Coventry, where his last game for them was a Championship playoff final, but there was an expectation that he was going to go. And now you see this season at Sporting, with what's happening with Rui Borges and leaving him out of Champions League games. Is there a mentality thing here? Again, we don't know the insides of the Sporting dressing room, but, given the track history, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. Now, the issue I have with Osimhen is that Osimhen isn't necessarily a new figure. He's not exactly a new kid on the block. He's been around.
Although they are the same age, him and Gyokeres.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I always sort of think about with players like Osimhen is that if they were genuinely elite level forwards, why hasn't somebody taken a punt on him? Because Osimhen seems to have been linked for 3, 4, 5 different summers now, and there's always seemed to be some sort of reticence. Even when he was at Lille, there was the opportunity to go get him, and Lille's not exactly it is a place where strikers go and develop and turn into regular goal scorers, especially young strikers. So if you gave me the option between the two, and they're both priced at 60, 65, 70
around similar price,
70 million pounds, I would lean towards perhaps Gyokeres for maybe 2 seasons before his ego kicks in. And then, Osimhen, just not sure he would potentially pass that Arteta sort of personality test, perhaps, because again, I think if somebody thought he had that top class personality, he first of all would have been signed a long time ago by one of Europe's elite, and he perhaps
I think it's hard to get him out of Napoli, though. I think you look at the amount of elite players who have played for years at Napoli, and how many of them actually were gettable out of there before they'd passed their peak. Viktor's kind of the exception to the rule, right? You look
Insigne
at
and Mertens had to leave on freeze. They had to run down their contracts.
Koulibaly?
He was past his peak by that point, and still Chelsea had to overpay for him, I think. So I think it's a difficult one when a player's gone to Napoli, and I think clubs in the past probably have been a little bit put off by the fact that Osimhen has had some pretty horrific injuries in the past, but like Dougie was saying, they were kind of freak injuries. They weren't really from being played into the ground or based on his style of play or anything. So I think he's had a bit of a poor hand in that sense.
I think he was slightly screwed over last year by his agent, for sure. I feel like there should have been more interest earlier in the window when Lukaku had gone there, and it all was quite last minute, and he was going to Chelsea, then ends up at Galatasaray, which is, no disrespect to Galatasaray or the Turkish Super League, it's a bit of a wasted year, which is frustrating when he's bang in the middle of his prime, and it's a year where he stayed fit as well. So I'd be slightly frustrated if I was Viktor.
And I also think that given all of those things, given the injuries, given the start to to his career that he had with that malaria that he had at Wolfsburg, I do think there is. I think there actually is. I think he does pass the personality test. I think he's come through so many difficult moments in his career, and generally speaking, has really has excelled after overcoming those difficulties. So I do think he would, but I also see your point in terms of Gyokeres. He's on that kind of very steady upward trajectory of going to the Championship, then going to Portugal. He hasn't had. I mean, I guess he overcame. He took a few years to really get going. He's a bit of a late bloomer, but there is more of a clear upward trajectory there. Whereas Osimhen has had a couple of years where he could have gone on to Real. He probably he could have gone on to say Real Madrid a couple of years ago before they signed Endrick and before they signed Mbappe. But it just didn't. The cards just didn't quite align for him. And so he's in a slightly not as shiny position, I guess, as Gyokeres is.
The one thing I would add as well, Africa Cup of Nations, that
Yeah.
has the impact in the season to leave for
That's a good point.
for a major tournament. Jamie Carragher. To leave in the middle of a season is a risk, and I think there's risk with both players.
Yeah.
Based on the personalities and whether they can be that elite 20-goal season striker that Arsenal have. I think there's just a little bit less of a risk with
Love it.
Gyokeres.
Guys, get in the comments. Who would you choose between the two Victors? I think two good options for sure. Right, let's move on to the winger / sort of secondary forward. Mikey, you're 1-0 down, so I'll give you the honours.
Okay, winger, yeah. Again, I've gone pretty big here, actually. But again, someone who's not going to cost as much as maybe some alternatives, just because he's got a release clause. Again, it's someone whose name has really been popping off in terms of being linked to Arsenal throughout the season, but particularly recently. And that's Nico Williams at Athletic Club. Now, he's not had his most electric season at Athletic Club. He's only scored 3 times in La Liga. 2 of them came very recently in a 7-1 rout over Real Valladolid. But his numbers are still pretty immense this season. I think he's taking more shots per game than he ever has done in his career. He's making more key passes per game than he ever has done in his career. He's making more progressive passes too. So I don't think it's for want of trying. I think his all-round game is still at a really high level. It's just that probably his finishing and maybe his shot location hasn't been as good as it has in recent years. But at the same time, this is someone who's still only 22 years old. I think unlike with Osimhen or Gyokeres, who you're buying to basically score 20 goals next season, I think Nico Williams comes in and I think can elevate that attack without having to be the main man straight away. Like, you have to hope that Saka's injury record is better next year. You have to hope that Odegaard's injury record is better next year. But if Saka were to get injured again next season, Nico Williams can do a job on the right too, as he has done at points, across his Athletic Club career. Also, more importantly, I think he does present, at least where he is at this stage of his career, he does present an upgrade on Gabriel Martinelli, and at least takes the pressure off Gabriel Martinelli to produce on a month-by-month basis. I think his ability to step up in big games, whether that be for Spain or Athletic Club over the last couple of years, is really telling. And also it feels like a good fit for Nico Williams as well, coming into a club managed by a Basque manager. He's got Zubamendi and Merino there now as well, or will have Zubamendi there, in the summer. But, it feels like that will be, a bit easier to adapt for Nico Williams, whereas before it felt like all the noises were pointing towards Barcelona, and it felt like, okay, well, yeah, that makes sense. He stays in Spain. He just moves to, one of the 2 big clubs there. I don't know whether Barcelona will actually go for him in the end, because he's got, a reported €200,000 a week contract at Athletic Club. I know the release clause is, around €58 million, which I think in isolation, Barcelona might be able to pull something there. But I do think in terms of wage structure, it makes more sense for Arsenal, this move. And Barcelona have another option like Alex Baena at Villarreal, who's been linked throughout the season as well, who would come with significantly less wages, even if the transfer fee would be around the same. So it does feel like there's an opportunity there with Arsenal. And after Barcelona, I just can't see who else would be a big competitor to Arsenal. I think PSG are sorted in the left wing position. Bradley Barcola was going to be my backup, was my other option from PSG, but I just think he'd cost too much. I think out of PSG, I think he'd just be harder to get out of there. I don't think any of the clubs in Italy are going to be after Nico Williams. I don't think they're going to be able to measure up to Arsenal in that sense. Maybe Bayern would be the other one, but again, I think they're pretty stocked in the forward line. They've kind of got to get rid of left wingers before really investing heavily in one. And again, I think if I'm Nico Williams, I think Arsenal feels like a nicer fit. So yeah, Nico Williams.
It's a really good pitch. It's a really good pitch. You have to do really well, Dougie.
Okay, well, this doesn't bode that well, because this was my more niche suggestion. Basically, I'll actually cover some players that I did consider strongly but didn't end up going for. If Dani Olmo had a great fitness record and was easier to sign, I think he'd be sensational for Arsenal. The fact he can play on the right, the left, and in the middle, absolutely brilliant. My issue with him, as it has been throughout his career, really, is just his injury record. Like, even this year, he's only been fit to start or play 10 League and Champions League games. He's missed 13 games with injury, 25 last season, 20 the year before. And it's a little bit unclear about whether he will actually be a Barcelona player in the summer. You know, given the fact he's missed so many games, I don't know whether Barcelona just kind of throw in the towel with this whole registration disaster they've got going on with him. Because he was only allowed to play up until December because Christensen was injured. Then he got fit and La Liga closed that loophole, and he's got this temporary registration to play. It's a complete mess, to be totally honest. So I'm not going to get involved with Dani Olmo for that reason and his injuries. I also considered Jamie Gittens out of Dortmund. I think the fact he grew up in England would make him really, really keen on a return to England. Also, Dortmund don't look like they're going to have European football to contend with as well. They've sold stars consistently throughout the last 10 years. They'd be keen to keep hold of him, definitely for another couple of years. But I think his performances, particularly in big games this year, suggest he does have a really high ceiling. I also thought about Ryan Cherki out of Lyon. Can play in a variety of different roles. Is having the breakout season that we probably expected him to have 2-3 years ago, but is still so young. I think his attitude at times has been called into question. I don't know whether Arteta would go for that. So instead I'm going for a utility forward that can play on the left, the right and in the middle that wouldn't upset the apple cart in terms of Saka or Odegaard, but could take off minutes off Martinelli or Trossard on the left. And I'm suggesting Brahim Diaz of Real Madrid. Now, Brahim Diaz is in a really interesting position. He obviously came through at Man City, gets that big move to Real Madrid, barely plays for 2 years, then goes on a 3-year loan spell to AC Milan and plays a crucial role, or a very important role, let's say at least, in their title win in 21-22, and was used as a number 10, was used off the right, was used off the left, and since returning to Real Madrid at the start of 23-24, has actually become a really useful player for Ancelotti, but will never be a starter there. And with Endrick only likely to take up more minutes going forward, with there's still some doubts about potentially the future of Vinicius Jr. and how that sort of forward line works going forward, and Real Madrid are always looking for the next big thing either way. I don't see Brahim Diaz ever becoming a key cog in this Real Madrid machine, and potentially given the fact that he is still very young, but older than Arda Güler, they might well back Arda Güler as well as their long-term bet as well. I like the fact that he's played 101 games for Real Madrid, 38 have been off the right, 20 as a number 10 and 18 off the left. And I do think Arsenal need a utility forward, kind of like a slight upgrade on someone like Alex Iwobi or Smith Rowe, effectively, to be able to take game time off Martinelli, but not to totally block his development, because whilst Martinelli has had a really poor last 18 months in an Arsenal shirt compared to his amazing, 21-22 or 22-23?
23, yeah.
Yeah, where he got 15 goals in the league. I'm not giving up on Martinelli as an Arsenal player yet. And I don't think Arsenal should either. Even last year for Real Madrid, 10 goals and 7 assists in 40 League and Champions League games for Brahim Diaz. He averaged a goal or an assist every 110 minutes, mainly used off the bench. And this year, 5 goals, 3 assists, mainly used off the bench again, but an assist versus Atalanta, a goal versus City, always ready to make an impact off the bench, which is where he might have to start, to be honest, if he joins Arsenal. He's still only 25, and yet he's played 100 games for Milan. He's played 100 games for Real Madrid. They've obviously had a success in bringing over Martin Odegaard from Real Madrid and the impact he's made as well. There's a Champions League winning experience in there. There's playing a crucial role in a side that win a League and Champions League double. And I don't think he upsets the apple cart. So while Nico Williams is the more exciting signing, I think he's considerably more expensive in terms of transfer fees and wages. I think there's a high likelihood that both probably want to remain in Spain ideally. But if Brahim Diaz's agent is being sensible and thinks you can pick up 25, 30 starts per season on an Arsenal side that could potentially go deep in all 4 competitions next year, where is your better chance of succeeding long term? I think there's a chance that Arsenal could go for Brahim Diaz.
I like how that links into the sort of City model where Arteta has dipped into a little bit. We've seen it with Zinchenko, Gabriel Jesus, Sterling, Pablo Mari. So, that wouldn't be so far-fetched. I think that would be if Arsenal fans saw Brahim Diaz come through the door, I don't think anyone would be surprised. However, the one thing that, I'm thinking of when it comes to, improving Arsenal's attack, not just in the centre-forward role, but you've got a world beater, I think we could say, in Bukayo Saka. You've got a key person who knits everything all together in Martin Odegaard. You know, Arsenal will probably address a centre-forward position in the summer. I think you need the best possible option on that left wing. I think Nico Williams ticks all the boxes because you mentioned, Mikey, that shot location was perhaps Nico Williams' perhaps weakness. But with Martinelli and Trossard, shot location is actually quite good.
Yeah.
But it's the finishing side of things which lets him down. And I just don't think Williams would be fazed at all by coming to Arsenal and being thrust into the spotlight and being the main man. You know, player of the match in the Euro 2024 final. That shows some pretty good skills, but also some pretty good sort of mentality to sort of take a big game like that by the scruff of the neck. And yeah, I think that probably... I don't think there's an acceptance at Arsenal, but I think it wouldn't surprise me if Leandro Trossard was moved on. There was that interest in Saudi Arabia after the summer transfer window closed. So I think there will probably be a gap on that left wing, and I think it has to be an out-and-out left winger that...
I can see the logic.
Yes, it can't... It won't necessarily, halt Martinelli's progress, but you look at all the major attacks from the best teams in Europe, and all of them have two top quality options in every position. Liverpool are winning the league because they can have Cody Gakpo, and the backup is Luis Diaz, who moved from the striker role. So that's what Arsenal really, really need. I think they need to perhaps move away from Premier League proven quality, which I think Brahim Diaz is better than, but I think Nico Williams is Europe level quality.
It's a great start to the summer. Gyokeres and Nico Williams coming through the door.
I mean, that's
pretty elite stuff for sure. And look, I totally get it. I think Nico Williams, the fact he can play on both sides so effectively, I just liked the fact that he could cover for Odegaard essentially as well, because in the first month or two of the season when Saka was fit and Odegaard wasn't, you still saw a big drop off in performance levels, and Odegaard probably hasn't got to his best levels this season, I think it's fair to say. So I think Arsenal do need to potentially consider a more central option.
I think in an ideal world, you have and the money's there. Like you sign someone like Brahim Diaz as well as Nico Williams, because I agree, Dougs. Like you need, we've spoken a lot about the wings, but I think when Odegaard was out injured, Arsenal obviously really felt it. And I know he's not been in the best form of the season, but like I think that reiterates your point really. Like ideally you'd go for both.
But you can't sleep on Ethan Nwaneri. That is somebody you have to think about, not just sort of for the Odegaard role, but also is right wing going to be his position for the next 2 years as part of his development. So you do have to think about that. That's why I think Nico Williams is good, because let's say Saka gets injured again next season and Arsenal have to go to Anfield or somewhere like that, or a big game, and maybe it's just a little bit too early for Nwaneri to sort of play that Saka role, then you move Nico Williams onto the other side. And I think maybe Brahim Diaz would then create a backup role for Odegaard that Nwaneri should probably have, because that's going to be his role long term. And I think you have to give a clear pathway for Nwaneri, because he's been actually Arsenal's one of brightest sparks in and amidst this sort of slump towards moving away from the Premier League title race and being unsure about Champions League contenders.
Just very quickly before we move on to the last position, then has that also featured in your thinking about Arsenal not needing to invest in the defence in the summer, the rise of Miles Lewis-Skelly as well? Because like before that, it still felt like is Calafiori really the left back to elevate Arsenal in years to come? Still kind of unconvinced about that. Timber, of course, playing most of his minutes on the right this season. But Lewis-Skelly's emergence feels like he's kind of covered, not that it's his specialist position, but the fact that he's been so solid at such a young age at left back has his emergence also, do you think, kind of solved maybe a headache that Arteta otherwise would have had?
Yeah, potentially. I think it goes back to the point that Arsenal haven't had that full complement of defenders available. When you think about it, if Ben White is fully fit, probably starts, and then Jurriën Timber becomes a left back option. Then you've got Timber, Calafiori, Tomiyasu. How many more left back options do you really want? I think Lewis-Skelly is going to end up as a number 6 or a defensive midfielder or something like that. in the long term. And, Arteta loves players who can play in multiple positions. But I think the fullback area, it doesn't feel like it, but I think Arsenal are very, very well stocked in there, and they have been for a good couple of years. Speaking to people inside the club, it's the injury to Tomiyasu has actually been a blessing in disguise, because it's allowed Lewis-Skelly to have that clear pathway towards the first team that he wouldn't have had if Tomiyasu was fully fit, with Calafiori, with Timber as an option as well. So yeah, I think Arsenal are pretty well stocked, and but I can see Lewis-Skelly, like Nwaneri, starting off in one position that's not his natural position, and then progressing in towards the position he played in the youth team, and he performed very well at youth team in that midfield role.
Okay, it is 1-1 going into the final midfield slot. Now, because Mikey won the last one, why don't I kick off? Mikey already mentioned Zubimendi. He might be coming in. It's not confirmed for sure, but let's see what happens there. But I actually didn't want to talk about Zubimendi because he'll definitely be talked about if that is confirmed. Arsenal improved last year from 84 points to 89, and that was the year after Granit Xhaka departed. But Leverkusen's improvement last year with Granit Xhaka was absolutely sensational. Losing one game all season, they won the league and cup. And Xhaka is a pretty unique player in that I think he makes other players around him so much better. And you saw that with Martinelli in that season I was already talking about, 15 goals. You see it into the positions that he is able to put Alex Grimaldo in now at Leverkusen. You see just their general improvement as a team since he's got there. And it took quite a while for Arsenal and Arsenal fans to really appreciate Granit Xhaka, because there was, when he was used as a 6, he's quite cumbersome on the turn, and he'd often make mistakes in terms of red cards, etc. Had a bit of a temper at various points as well. But he was always really appreciated within the club. And I think it's because players realised that his weight of pass, his direction of pass is always on point. Even when Arsenal were quite bad, say when they finished 8th in 2019-20, Xhaka was almost uniquely good at getting the ball into the final third. He was 6th for passes into the final third in Europe. He was 5th for progressive passes. And I do think Arsenal's midfield and Martinelli have suffered from that, his absence. It sometimes does feel like when Arsenal are coming up against sides that sit deep against them, because they do respect them so much now, there's not really the guile in midfield, particularly with Odegaard slightly off it this year, in terms of that passing through. Like, Rice is a fantastic dynamic dribbler, but I think Xhaka is obviously an on-the-ball passer, better through pass, etc. Yeah. So I want someone who can work the ball more effectively into the final third. And that player is Angelo Stiller of Stuttgart. Now, he came through at Bayern Munich. He eventually left for Hoffenheim in 2021, initially on loan in January 2021. But he was actually largely a bit-part player at Hoffenheim. He then gets this quite unheralded move to Stuttgart at the start of last season. And Sebastian Hoeneß, who is one of the most impressive up-and-coming managers in European football, instantly was like, this guy is going to be a regular for me. And he started 31 out of 34 Bundesliga games last year as Stuttgart finished 2nd. He got 1 goal and 5 assists. This year, 1 goal and 5 assists again. There's only 9 Bundesliga players that have provided more assists. He's level with Grimaldo. He's level with Kimmich. He's level with Brandt. He's got 1 fewer assist than Harry Kane, who's obviously playing for a Bayern Munich side that look like they're going to sweep the league title. I think they've got some issues potentially in the Champions League, but let's see what happens there. And Stiller can play as a 6, but he's really best as a sort of 8 who's got freedom to go forward and pick out line-breaking passes. He's also very good at set pieces. This year in the Bundesliga, he's at 0.2 expected assists per 90. That's the same as Morgan Rogers in the Premier League, who's been absolutely sensational, I think, for Aston Villa. And he's 12th for passes completed in Europe. He's 4th amongst midfielders for passes completed. Metronomic passer, but not just playing safe passes all the time. As I said, he's created more chances this year than Szoboszlai, who's had a great last few weeks for Liverpool. He's created more chances than Odegaard. And he's 5th for passes into the final third in Europe. So if you're trying to find a player that is most stylistically similar to Granit Xhaka, who's also at the start of their career, I think Angelo Stiller's right up there. And he's not a defensive behemoth, but I think if you've got Marino in there, you've potentially got Zubimendi, you've got Declan Rice. I don't think you need another dual winner in there. Arsenal, I think, have almost moved too far towards physical 6'2" dual winners. I think they need a little bit more guile in midfield. And Angelo Stiller has a wonderful vision on him, great control in tight areas, and has just got this sensational eye for a pass and can put his foot in if needed as well. He's got a contract until 2028, but he's still under the radar at the moment, so much so that I still think he's fairly achievable. Maybe I think £50 million might do it, £45 million. Maybe that's a little bit ambitious, maybe more like 50. But I don't think he's going to absolutely break the bank. My issue and my worry is it looks like Joshua Kimmich is going to leave Bayern Munich this summer. There are reports that they see Stieler as the ideal Kimmich replacement. He's obviously come through the ranks there. He scored against them at the weekend, actually, for Stuttgart, celebrated quite wildly. So I don't know whether there's any love lost there. But you know, for most German players, playing for Bayern Munich is the pinnacle over playing for a club like Arsenal. I think most top German players want to play for Bayern Munich rather than the top Premier League players potentially wanting to play for Real Madrid or Barcelona. It does feel like Bayern, just given their history and the way they hoover up national headlines there, are so much more the pinnacle. So maybe Stieler, if there's Bayern or Arsenal on the table, would choose Bayern. But I think he's such a useful option for Arsenal going forward. You know, took Stuttgart to second last year, as I said. Played really, really well in the Champions League this year. I think only Kimmich completed more passes into the final third, and he played 2 more games than Stieler as well, who was knocked out in the group stage for a Stuttgart side that struggled. He's raised his game every step that he's had to. He's now a German international, and I think he'd be a perfect fit for Arsenal.
Well, if Stieler goes to Bayern, then where does Kimmich go? That's the
well,
question.
interesting you say that. Interesting you say that. It's interesting actually with Stieler and the Bayern connection because, you know, Sebastian Hoeneß has, you know, not only managed him at Stuttgart, he took him to Hoffenheim as soon as Hoeneß was appointed there. He managed him in the Bayern ranks as well. And then add to that the fact that, you know, Sebastian Hoeneß is, you know, a relation of Uli Hoeneß as well. It's like the stronghold over Stieler there. It does feel like it would be stacked against Arsenal if Kimmich were to leave and they were to target Stieler as the replacement. And this, you know, I didn't actually know Dougie was picking Stieler before I went for Kimmich here, but I just do think that it's a real market opportunity, this one, Joshua Kimmich, for a side who are, you know, they're nearly there in terms of Premier League champion status or title favourite status. I think we both had Arsenal down as our title favourites going into this season, and, you know, I don't think anyone saw Arne Slot having as good a season as he did at Liverpool, as you were alluding to earlier, Sam. But yeah, I think Arsenal are, you know, they are much closer to a title than I think, you know, their performances this season suggest and their difficulties this season suggest. And I think someone like Joshua Kimmich,
expensive.
Well, expensive only in terms of wages. But then, you know, the fact that he reportedly rejected or stalled on a pay bump at Bayern Munich makes me think, well, maybe he'd be willing to take a little bit of a pay cut to find a new challenge. Kimmich, I think, you know, Barcelona are another club who are heavily linked with him. Of course, Man City heavily linked with him as well. But aside from that, I don't know who would be willing to pay those kind of wages. Maybe Man City would, but you think, you know, reports that Liverpool aren't willing to pay it. I think Arsenal could, you know, if Arsenal could somehow get him to agree to £250,000 a week on a 2-year deal, it could be a wage well spent for Arsenal. Kimmich is still one of the best midfielders in Europe. He ranks, I think, 2nd in Europe this year for progressive passes. He could also cover at right back, of course, if there were injuries in that position.
Another right back,
and he, but one of the best fullbacks in the world, you know, on his day as well. And look, I think Dougie's kind of said it already. Like, Kimmich basically fits the bill in terms of what, you know, we're both looking for the same kind of midfielder there. Someone with a bit of guile, an amazing passer, someone who can contribute in the final third. I think Kimmich ranks 9th in Europe's top 5 leagues for shot creating actions this season. So his ability to move into the final third and make things happen, you know, has always been there, but particularly in recent seasons, and especially since playing alongside Pavlovic and Palhinha this year, where their main game really is breaking up play and just winning back possession. He's also a corner specialist as well, and we know how much Arteta, you know, loves players who can take good corners. I know you're already stacked in terms of, you know, Declan Rice and Saka there, who you know, brilliant deliveries from out wide in that sense. But Kimmich, another player who can step up in that way, and he is still a decent defender. 2.4 tackles and interceptions per 90 this season in a Bayern Munich side that keep more possession than anyone else in Europe. I think they're Europe's top scorers as well. So it's such a ball-heavy side under Vincent Kompany. He's still able to do the dirty work. I guess the one issue would be is with Zubimendi, Rice and Odegaard at the club, is Kimmich even an automatic starter there? I'm not so sure, but at the same time, I think you do need to think about tired legs in that midfield, and Declan Rice has played so many minutes since coming through at West Ham. He was a pretty key player from the word go at West Ham. Took early on the mantle from Mark Noble as his career was winding down. And obviously, since he's been at Arsenal, £100 million signing, of course he's going to be starting every single game. But I think we have seen his game suffer a little bit this season. Like Dougie says, I think they need someone who can do something different to Rice in that midfield. And yes, Zubimendi will provide that to an extent, but I think someone with Kimmich's experience, he's German captain now, he's been a leader at Bayern Munich for a number of years as well, and he's still at the top of his game. I just feel like it would be a really, really special signing.
This is a really interesting call for you to make, Sam, because I think Stieler and Kimmich have so many stylistic similarities. Stieler's left-footed, but Kimmich is right-footed, but Stieler has the free kick tendencies as well. You're almost picking between Kimmich's air and Kimmich. So it's a big call.
It's basically experience versus youth. It's like, what's the bigger priority here? I would argue, with Arsenal going for the title next season, that's where my thinking was. It was just like, Kimmich is a win now guy.
Injury record as well, but it is for 2 years.
But whereas, Stieler, I think excellent long-term option. But yeah,
I mean, Kimmich would be a hell of a statement for Arsenal to make. I think in the summer transfer window. I agree with Mikey's point that Declan Rice maybe needs a little bit of competition. I think perhaps something that needs to be considered is that Arsenal are likely to let Thomas Partey and Jorginho go, and that's a lot of experience and that's a lot of defensive solidity and astuteness that Arsenal would be losing. So I think experience is perhaps needed. I think also Partey and Jorginho leaving is why I'm not necessarily worried about the wages side of things. Thomas Partey is one of Arsenal's biggest earners, following his move from Atletico Madrid when he was, deemed up there as one of the best defensive midfielders or best players in his position. Jorginho also high wages. I think also Arsenal will probably cash in on Alex Zinchenko as well. He's a big wage player, so I'm not worried about that. I am worried slightly that the Kimmich is agent talk, and that perhaps Kimmich's camp is using Arsenal to get a better deal, get a better package out of Bayern Munich. So whether that will happen is very interesting, and also you've got to remember the Zubimendi context with it as well. But Arsenal ultimately need a number 6 that can maybe sort of switch around a little bit with Rice, and while Stieler might be sort of better suited to that, there is this sort of win now mentality that Arsenal need, and Kimmich can play as the deep one and maybe play sort of like a double pivot with Rice at times, but could maybe also step up into the right half space, and that can maybe require a different role for Martin Odegaard as well, which would probably better his game. I think most of that makes sense, and I think that if you do bring in a Williams at left wing, he hasn't had the best of seasons, so there are some question marks potentially still. If you bring in a Gyokeres or a Sesko or Osimhen, you have that sort of European player coming into the Premier League for the first time. There are question marks on that. There are absolutely zero question marks there if Joshua Kimmich turns up to the Arsenal training ground with his boots saying, "Let me help you guys win a Premier League." And I think that's where perhaps Arsenal Arteta maybe need to shift from young players with potential towards big names and big characters in dressing rooms to bring that little bit of still composure in those big moments. So option between the two, I'd go with Kimmich, but it's going to be really interesting to see where Zubimendi fits in all of that as well.
I can see the logic for sure. I think there's actually a high chance that Steele ends up in the Premier League anyway this summer. So, I mean, get excited, guys.
Be great at Man City, wouldn't he?
They'd
so good.
I think they'd both be awesome picks. I actually thought all 6 suggestions, maybe with the exception of Brahim Diaz, maybe not as much star quality there, but I thought they were very good. And it ends with a 2-1 win for Mikey McCubbin. Congratulations.
Well done.
Thank you very much, Sam Blitz. I think that was a very impressive audition to be the Arsenal sporting director.
Well, I think Arsenal
it's easy when you're just offered the best players.
Well, Arsenal fans would be really disappointed if I turned up saying, right, here we go, this is what we're going to do. Unfortunately, my video game and experience doesn't quite match up to what the Arsenal job requirements are.
I think you did an excellent job for sure. So we fixed Arsenal, or transformed them into title winners, let's say, with Gyokeres, Nico Williams and Joshua Kimmich. What a summer that has been. Guys, thank you so much for watching the Lowdown for this week. Let us know what you guys thought of our suggestions and your own ones in the comments section, and we'll catch you next week. Bye-bye.